Good morning and welcome to Face the State. This week, after nearly a week of controversy, a new governor was declared. He is Dan Malloy, the former mayor of Stamford, first mayor in decades to be elected governor, and the first Democrat since the Reagan era. Governor-elect Malloy, congratulations. And welcome back. Good to see you here.
It's nice to be here. I'm getting used to hanging around here.
Yes, well, we're not complaining about that. Our guest reporters today, Angela Dias of WTIC AM 1080 and Brian Lockhart from the Stamford Advocate. Welcome back to you both as well. And Governor-elect, I want to ask you, first of all, you didn't have that big celebration on election night. You were denied that, the big hoopla because of the counting that was still going on and the controversy. Now you're officially the governor-elect. So how does it feel?
It feels great. I mean, listen, this is something that I wanted to do and dedicated a large portion of my life to accomplishing. It is a serious time. I mean, Connecticut is in deep trouble, or as I've taken to saying, it's pretty ugly out there right now. I'm excited about having the chance to be the person who helps turn the state around, start creating jobs, invest in infrastructure, that sort of thing. But I also have to catch my breath. It's a daunting task that lies ahead of the legislature, or the new governor, myself in this case, and the people of Connecticut.
Angela?
Mr. Malloy, during the campaign, you didn't rule out raising taxes as a way, as part of the plan to eliminate a huge deficit around $3.5 billion. You also talked about possibly raising a tax to protect programs that help low-income residents of the state. Well, the campaign is over. Isn't it more realistic to say now at this point, there's no way we can get out of this mess without some kind of tax increase somewhere?
Well, I wish somebody in your position had asked my opponent that question during the campaign. What I said is that I wouldn't take anything off the table because I knew that how tough things are, and I'm not going to be a governor who disassembles the safety net. I'm not going to be a governor who puts more mentally ill people on the streets of our cities or takes away drug or alcohol treatment for the people who are necessary, who need to avail themselves of that. Nor am I going to be the person who puts people who are currently in nursing homes on the streets. I'm not going to do that. Having said that, everything else is on the table, and we'll find a way to get through this. Connecticut is filled with strong and resilient people. They know what the challenges are. So, my first thing is we're going to change the rules. First of all, we're going to start telling the truth about the budget. We're going to go to generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP principles, as the way that we report our financials, so that you can't hide or pretend you have a surplus when you actually have a deficit. I will sign no budget next spring until GAAP is the law of the state of Connecticut. And on the day that I'm sworn in, I will sign an executive order that says we'll begin reporting under that system. From there, we're going to build a budget. We're going to learn how to live within our means. We're going to set appropriate goals for ourselves. But we will not disassemble what remains of the safety net.
But doesn't that by necessity mean a tax increase somewhere, either an increase in sales tax or gas tax or millionaires tax? Well,
I would say this, that the ability to balance this budget in the short run without looking at revenue is a pretty dim prospect. Likewise, cutting our way out of it, which was what proposed, would be very difficult as well. We're looking at a $3.4 billion deficit after 2 years in which the government did not spend more money the following year than it did the year before. So this is a deep problem. It is structural in nature. It took us years to get to this point, and it's probably going to take us a number of years to get out. But we're going to start telling the truth. We're going to set a system in place that makes sure that we learn how to live within our means, that we set appropriate goals for ourselves, and that we start using money in an appropriate fashion. I believe bonded money should be used to invest in infrastructure. Our infrastructure is woefully inadequate in this state. That's why I want to get away from borrowing operating dollars as quickly as we can.
If I can just jump in for a moment, is that to imply, by telling the truth about the budget, is that to imply that Governor Rell was not telling the truth?
I'm implying that the legislature and the governor failed to fully disclose to the people of Connecticut how bad things are. We should have gone to GAAP finance rules 20 years ago when we put an income tax in. We didn't do that. And so people would run around the state capitol, governors and legislators, and pretend that there was a surplus when there was no surplus. I even heard this past last year, during the height of the gubernatorial contest, my running mate, now the Lieutenant Governor-elect Nancy Wyman, announced that we had ended June 30th with approximately $400 million in the bank when we had anticipated having no money in the bank. And I actually heard people talk about how we should spend that surplus, even though under GAAP in the current year, as I'm sitting here, we're $2.5 billion in deficit, and we're looking at an additional $1 billion in deficit next year. It makes no sense. We've got to be honest. We've got to be transparent. That's how you start to get well.
Right.
Dan, were you to look at a tax increase, let me just go back to Angela's question. Would you favor an income tax increase? Would you be looking at a sales tax increase? What type of taxes would you be looking at? What's the most realistic?
Well, first of all, I'm not advocating a tax, but what I have said, and I'll repeat it again, that I think that our approach to taxation needs to be progressive in nature. That is, that people should reasonably expect that the middle class will not pay a larger share of the burden than the wealthiest individuals in our state, or that the poor will not be disproportionately impacted by those adjustments as well. I'm hoping that whatever we do, we can get done quickly, that we can establish a future system in the state of Connecticut where we balance this budget and thereafter live within our means.
There's been a battle up here in Hartford in the legislature over the last few years over what is middle class in Connecticut. And you're probably familiar with this one. The Democrats up here have proposed income tax increases. They typically have targeted households of $250,000 or above. Democrats from Fairfield County and from Stamford in particular have pushed back against that, arguing no, in Connecticut and in particular in our neck of the woods, $250,000 is middle class. So what is your view on that?
I think they're both right. I think that we have to be careful about drawing a line in the sand, that we have to be cognizant that there are different costs associated with living in different parts of the state. Average cost of a house, for instance, is substantially greater in Fairfield County than it is in the other counties in the state, by hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I think that's something that we have to be mindful of and address it once we determine whether we need to raise revenue.
As you've gone through the budget so far, you had said on the campaign trail that you would not hire as many people as Governor Rell has hired. Which positions would you eliminate when you take over, and where else can we expect to see cuts in terms of state employees?
Well, it's a great question. It's a fair question. What I've said is on the appointment side that we will reduce appointments by about 15%, not about, by 15%, and we'll hold to that. And I don't have a final number, but in round numbers, that probably means about 600 positions. 15% is what we'll begin with by reducing that. But I think we're going to put state government on a long-term diet, and that I hope that in a few years from now, state government is much more efficient and is being operated by fewer people. But I think it's going to take some period of time to create those efficiencies, just as it did when I was mayor of the city of Stamford. I had 22 my predecessor had 22 direct reports. We narrowed that down to 4 direct reports. We consolidated agencies within the 4 director positions. That was some of the stuff that we're going to have to do here. I was mayor of Stamford for 14 years. I downsized city-side government by 8.4%, even as our population increased by 12,000 people. I did it there. I'm going to do it again.
Any other examples of waste you've seen so far?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's tremendous waste, whether it's the community colleges, each contracting separately for HR management systems or IT systems, or how we purchase commodities. We basically bid commodities once or twice a year, as opposed to on a daily basis. That's eBay, by the way. Electricity, we contracted at rates that were entirely too high over the last summer. I think it cost us about $60 million. So there are lots of areas to save money. How you get the $3.4 billion, that's the $3.4 billion question.
Mr. Malloy, you expressed support for mandatory paid sick leave during the campaign, something that many private businesses oppose. Is that a bill you're going to introduce in your first year as governor?
It's a bill that I'm prepared to sign if it reports out of the 2 houses. And let's be very clear what we're talking about. We're talking about a system by which a person would have to work a minimum of 520 hours before they earned 1 hour of sick time. And they'd have to work for more than 90 days. And I've actually heard some pushback that should be 120 days to take seasonal employment, for instance, at a entertainment location, a summer entertainment location, to take that group out. So I'm open to that, but this is what I don't want. I don't want sick people coming to work and infecting other people. I don't want sick people reporting to work in a hospital and making their patients sicker, or to a hotel and making people sick, or to a restaurant. So yeah, I'm in favor of a system that does not require people to go to work sick.
More with Governor-elect Malloy in just a moment. And if you'd like to comment on today's program, you can do so either on my blog, The Hartfordite, on WFSB.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's begin with Brian.
Will you be asking any of Governor Rell's commissioners to stay on?
I may. You know, this is not an ideological situation. I think the governor has some good people who've worked for her, and they may be invited to stay. I'm not prejudging it, I guess.
What's that process like?
Well, you know, process will get underway in earnest this coming week. I have a great chief of staff, Tim Bannon, who's done, and we had done some pre-planning, and he's executing a plan and putting committees together, a personnel committee, a steering committee, and policy issue committees. So we'll roll that out this coming week. First of all, I think the governor's asked all of her commissioners and deputy commissioners to tender their resignation, which is appropriate. And then we need to know if any of those individuals are interested in staying in government, and if they are, they'll be interviewed for positions.
You've been critical of split government, saying it didn't work in the last 20 years, but when you go back to the last Democratic administration, 1986 to 1990, Governor O'Neill had a big Democratic majority. They expanded government, spent a lot of money, and the state was in a mess by the end of the first term. What did you learn from that? Have you studied it at all? I mean,
well, I did. I mean, and you're the host, and so I don't want to take you on too many issues, but the infrastructure of the state of Connecticut was in far better shape 20 years ago than it is today.
You can take me on as well.
You know, Governor O'Neill, to his credit, responded to a crisis in our bridge and highway system and rebuilt them. And then we went back to sleep for another 20 years. We were mired in a national recession, just like we are now. We're not blaming Jody Rell for the national recession. Somehow we blamed Bill O'Neill for the national recession. For whatever reason, they're being treated differently. Having said all of that, these are times of crisis. This is a bigger crisis than we were in 1980. Our structural deficit at $3.4 billion is multiples of the problem that Governor Weicker inherited from Governor O'Neill. This is the biggest economic challenge that the state has had to face. And in every year since 1980, we've had fewer jobs in Connecticut than we had the year before. So it's gotten deeper. It's structural in nature. It is a revenue problem as well as a spending problem. The current budget is filled with about $3 billion in one-time gap fillers, and I'm going to have to straighten this mess out, and that's what people elected me to do.
Former Governor Rowland says you should bond and build, and that'll create jobs. Do you agree?
I hadn't heard him say that, but I'll take you on it. I think we should build. I am an infrastructure guy. I believe, listen, if you study economics, and American economics in particular, you understand that in the 8 prior recessions following the Second World War to the current recession, each of those recessions was we were led out of by a reigniting construction and building and infrastructure investment. And yet, we've just elected a whole bunch of congressmen to Washington who don't want to spend money on infrastructure. I was elected in the state of Connecticut. I want to spend money on infrastructure, which means we have to get away from borrowing money to cover operating expenses, because what's happened is that squeezed out our ability to borrow money for long-term investment purposes. That's the kind of investment I want to make.
Angela?
Governor Rell this week expressed the thought that having a Republican governor and a Democratic-controlled legislature provided a balance. How do you see the dynamic now?
It's just been a mess. I mean, Connecticut's a mess. We haven't created jobs for 22 years. There are only 2 states in that category, Michigan and ourselves. Let's stop playing a game that Connecticut's in good shape. It is in terrible shape. And we don't even tell the truth to one another. The legislature doesn't speak to the governor in the same language. We need to change that. That's why I was elected. And I'm prepared to change that dynamic by telling people the truth. It's a mess. It's ugly. We need to make appropriate changes. We need to make appropriate investments in our infrastructure so we can be competitive with other states. We need to lower electric rates so we're not 76% greater than the national average price and 20% greater than any other state in New England. We need to improve urban educational systems rapidly so we can compete. We need to look at our colleges and universities differently, allow them to be more entrepreneurial. I'm prepared to do that.
So you're on the same page with Democratic leaders in the General Assembly. You have the same agenda?
Not necessarily, no. I think I am by far the most fiscally conservative governor to be elected in the state of Connecticut in 4, 5, or 6 terms. And I'm also the most progressive governor to be elected in the state of Connecticut in that same period of time. And some people don't think those things go together. I do.
Right.
Mr. Malloy, once you're sworn in, what is the very first thing you're going to do to try and create jobs?
I'm going to sign, the first thing I'm going to do after I take the oath is I'm going to sign an executive order on generally accepted accounting principles, which I've probably talked about too much and people have probably fallen back to sleep by now. But beyond that, what we're going to do is consolidate agencies that are involved in economic development. People are going to understand that the governor is the chief economic development officer of the state of Connecticut, just as you know I was in the city of Stamford for 14 years. They need people who want to come to a state or enlarge themselves in a state want to have some certainty, and I'm going to make sure that we provide that certainty with respect to what we tell companies they can or cannot do in our state. But I also have a very different approach. I spoke to a bunch of people from Travelers Insurance this week, and I told them that I actually think old line, property and casualty and life insurance industry in Connecticut is a growth industry, and I'm going to treat it as such. I got a round of applause because that's an industry that thinks Connecticut took them for granted and forgot about them and allowed jobs to be shipped to Des Moines, Iowa, or to South Dakota or elsewhere in the country and in the world. We need to concentrate on what our strengths are. I know what our strengths are. Great, well-educated, hard-working workforce.
Now that you're governor, is there anything you can do? Let's use a specific example, United Technologies. They're in the middle of contract negotiations with their union. Is there anything you think you can do to convince United Technologies to create more manufacturing jobs here in Connecticut?
Sure, I could lower electric rates or create systems by which they could lower their own electric rates. I have a proposal with respect to trading in R&D tax credits, of which they have hundreds of millions of dollars accumulated tax credits, which they can only write off against their state income tax obligation, which probably is in the area of $7 to $9 million a year. So they have all of this captive money, which they can hardly use. I want to have a discussion with them about switching that into a capital investment credit and actually have them build additional facilities or modernize facilities in this state. I'm willing to sit down with them and have that discussion, as I am with other people who have accumulated R&D tax credits.
The last 3 governors have been critical of Attorney General Richard Blumenthal's lawsuit, saying it has helped make this state unfriendly to business. Would you encourage the next Attorney General to sue less frequently? I
used to practice law with the incoming Attorney General, George Jepson, a good friend. I congratulate him. But, I have to say, I think sometimes people picked on Dick. I think he picked a lot of fights, but he picked a lot of fights on behalf of consumers, which I don't think is the wrong thing to do. And by the way, name an Attorney General in the 50 states that wasn't suing somebody somewhere. I mean, maybe we need a better balance, but I think a lot of the fights that he got involved in were the appropriate fights. Now, having said that, I look forward to having a close working relationship with Attorney General Jepson. He has expressed to me a desire to help in the building of jobs and the bringing of jobs to the state of Connecticut, so I look to have a good, strong working relationship with him. More with Governor-elect Malloy in just a moment, but first, if you'd like to comment on the program, you can do so on one of these 3 venues here: Facebook, Twitter, or my blog. We'll be right back. Congressman Chris Murphy's been doing this Buy American thing. The state buys hundreds of cars made overseas in Japan. Do you think that should continue? I think we should buy as many cars made in America as possible. And in point of fact, some of those cars that have foreign names are actually constructed in the United States. Well, these ones here, the Toyota Prius, they bought hundreds of them, were all manufactured in Japan. Right. Well, listen, I think we should buy as many products manufactured in the United States as possible. Angela?
Talking about GAP again, does it cost several $100 million to implement?
No. No, it's a fallacy, repeated by people who don't understand accounting.
Right.
You recently named Tim Bannon as your chief of staff. Can you explain a little bit, just tell people about Mr. Bannon, and also what will your chief of staff be doing? Lisa Moody, who is Republican Governor Rell's chief of staff, has often been called a shadow governor. So how much power is Mr. Bannon going to have in your administration?
Well, he's my chief of staff, so he's going to have a lot of power, but there's only going to be one governor, and it's going to be me. Again, you know, I reference our prior relationship. You covered me while I was mayor. I don't think there was any doubt of who was mayor of the city of Stamford, even though I had an extensive staff. Tim Bannon is a great guy, very, very bright, has worked in the private and public sectors, worked in the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, inside of government, advised both Republican and Democratic governors. He's the right person for the right job at the right time.
Do you see any of the men who ran against you working for you at all?
No, I don't.
Angela?
Well, let's do something fun. What are your plans for the inaugural ball?
You know what? This whole thing is interesting because, you know, I'm not sure how to take this. I guess a different group actually runs the inaugural ball. I guess I'm invited.
Well, you're invited, but you can sort of point them in the right direction.
I'm definitely bringing my wife.
That's good.
Yeah.
Brian?
And also, can you talk a bit about where you're going to be living? Are you going to be living in the governor's mansion? Are you going to be splitting your time between Hartford and Stamford?
Oh, we're going to be living in Hartford. Both Kathy and I are excited about moving to Hartford. You know, I'm sure we'll get back to Stamford. I mean, listen, 6 of my brothers live in the same neighborhood. The 7 of us live in the same neighborhood in Stamford. So I'm going to be back to Stamford quite often. But no, my primary residence during the period of time in which I'm governor will be Hartford.
As governor, this will probably come up during your term. What should be named in honor of Senator Chris Dodd as he leaves after 36 years in Congress?
I mean, what shouldn't be named in honor of Chris Dodd? A great public servant who, even in these final years of his term, has just done remarkable things. You know, I know people complain about TARP, but it saved the American economy. I know people complain about stimulus spending. Imagine how much greater unemployment would be without it. Listen, Chris Dodd's a friend of every person in the state of Connecticut, and you know, he may not want anything named after him. Maybe a new rose, or a new road, or whatever. I consider him a great personal friend.
Angela?
You ran for governor before, you lost. It's been a long haul for you. How does it... Have you always seen yourself as governor of Connecticut?
No, I didn't always see myself as governor of Connecticut, but I did see myself as, from the time that I was a child, as a public servant. I was raised in a family where public service was tremendously important. Both my mother and father were gigantic contributors to their churches, their organizations, and their communities. It's very natural for me. You know, my first job out of law school was to be a prosecutor in New York City. I served on boards and commissions in Stamford, became the mayor, now I'm the governor. Sounds like an interesting story.
Briefly, final question. If Joe Ganim is the Democratic nominee for mayor in Bridgeport next year, will you support him?
I don't think Joe Ganim is going to be the candidate for mayor in Bridgeport, but ultimately the people of Bridgeport will decide who their nominee is, and I'm not sure that anyone needs my support.
Governor-elect Dan Malloy, thanks for being with us today. Congratulations again. Angela Dias from WTIC and Brian Lockhart from the Stamford Advocate. I'm Dennis House, inviting you to join us again next Sunday morning. Enjoy some great football today.